Day 282 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And as always, I start off with those Russian military losses. So as of the 2nd of December 2022, bit of a milestone here, so up to 90,000 Russian military personnel losses there. And in the last day, there's been an additional 650 of which. Then we'll take a look at the hardware losses. So just quickly, armored combat vehicles, an additional 6, tanks 1, artillery 1, and 1 helicopter loss as well for the Russian forces. Also, we have this updated graphic which depicts Russian military personnel losses over time. So since the commencement of the war on February 24th this year, the timescale is on a monthly basis, as you will see there. The trend has moved upwards and peaked as of November, so just last month for the Russian forces as well. Then we'll take a really quick peek at my homegrown hobby of captured Russian hardware in working condition. And I'll be really quick today, but I only show this once a week now. So as you can see, not the least of which, quite a few updates there of tanks, artillery systems, infantry, fighting vehicles, and other assortments additions as well. Then we'll move back to the map where we'll start out in Russia, where there is another fire in Moscow. Again. So it's said to be some warehouses of a military nature, although it was difficult to confirm this entirely as of yet. But this footage, if you look close, sort of reminds me of that 1990s or mid-90s Twister film. It's the camera angle from the truck, it's the grey smoke that completely envelopes the air. Quite a sight to behold. Then we'll move across to Ukraine, and more particularly in the Donbass, where overnight the armed forces of Ukraine once again hit and destroyed enemy equipment in Starobilsk. So that is really center Luhansk, the Luhansk Oblast there. Then moving on a little further south to the front line, where Ukrainian forces are approaching Crimea from the south as the battles rage in the forest area. In fact, Russian sources themselves say the AFU was spotted just 2 kilometers or about a mile, a bit less than a mile there, or sorry, a little bit more. So spotted just a mile south of their Russian positions in the last 24 hours. And a bit further down, the Russian forces keep attacking Bilorivka, Yakovlivka, and Soledar. But all of these attacks have been continued to be repelled. Oh, and I hope I'm not jumping the map too much, but Ukrainian HIMARS hit more rail infrastructure near Ilyvisk overnight. So that's just southeast of the main city of Donetsk. So effectively, Russia loves its rail transport lines. So Ukraine takes out Russia's rail transport lines with increased regularity in the past couple of weeks as well. And then moving back across, I knew that I did skip something, so Bakhmut. So Bakhmut continues to hold under increasing pressure from Russian forces to the north, south, and central locations just beyond it on the east side. Now, Bakhmut really matters so much to the Wagner militia group and Russia to take this settlement, to take this city, which wouldn't really change the overall strategic situation in the region, more of a political whim. But I remember back on September 1st when Putin ordered his forces to take the rest of the Donbass, the whole entirety of the rest of it, by the 14th of September, 2 weeks later. Then September 14th passed, and that didn't happen. And this was probably one of the turning points in the war, where Putin was so frustrated, realizing that brute force alone could not win him the territory. But really getting back into it more specifically, so Bakhmut, the AFU isn't backing down in this region. and some of the best fighters of the Ukrainian army are stationed right here. Then we'll move across to the Zaporizhia region, where I find the situation is both interesting and evolving at the moment. So the Russian forces have withdrawn some of their units from the frontline settlements here. This is due to mass casualties taken in recent precision strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces. So it's really been some highly attritional losses for the Russian forces right here. And in fact, a number of Russian military journalists have voiced their strong concerns about the Russian army leaving the oblast by the end of the year. But in the end, the reality of the matter is the Russian military's pullbacks from the front lines right here suggest it can't defend critical areas in the midst of increasing Ukrainian strikes. Which all of that means now we have Russian forces building new lines of defense in places like Kokiane, so right there, which is about 15 miles or about 25 kilometers, so 24 kilometers, yeah, still about 15 miles from the front line. So new defensive positions really pushed right back there for the Russian forces. Then we'll move across to the other front line, the Kherson Oblast. So what's happening here overall for the Russian forces, strategically speaking, is that they've been forced to move their supply nodes further and further back from the front lines. And even their logistical routes have become much more vulnerable to Ukrainian strikes more than ever before since Ukraine liberated the region, the North Bank, about 3 or so weeks ago. And so those Ukrainian strikes I speak of include Kakhovka, Oleshki, and Tavria. And speaking of one of those, so Oleshki. Now, like I mentioned just yesterday, there is a decrease in the number of Russian military and equipment in Oleshki. And Ukraine is clearly now setting their sights on this location, heavily targeting it, which will eventually drive out the Russians and put a massive wedge in Russian frontal defensive lines right here. But from this general area, the Russian forces still fired back. They got a residential house overnight on the north bank near Kherson City. So this is what we have here, folks. Ukraine precisely targeting and hitting key Russian sites from just south of the river. And then we've got Russia indiscriminately shelling useless targets on the north of the river and slowly but surely needing to pull back their forces further and further away. So I think deep down both sides can agree that Russia cannot hold the South Bank forever. But my pro-Russian friends in the comments section, please post your own determinations on what's happening here in this region on the south side. Note, you cannot say the following answers. Then we'll move across to some news for the day. So we'll start off with this one here. So a Russian independent news media outlet named Meduza leaked an official Russian Kremlin poll about the waning public support in Russia for their war in Ukraine. So the results showed that support dropped quite significantly among Russian civilians there, with only 1 in 4 Russians now in favor of the war, down from 57% just 5 months ago in July. So I guess when your country is shooting missiles at civilian infrastructure, power infrastructure and buildings, and other various locations there, but also openly admitting to doing that, then you can really only support your government for so long. Meanwhile, the Russian mobilization has caused the biggest labor shortage in Russia in 25 years, which will have all sorts of economic knock-on effects, but I'm sure to get into that in a later video. Then in some more news, US President Biden and French President Macron caught up recently to continue to show their solidarity and support for Ukraine. In particular, they also reaffirmed that they would not force Ukraine to the negotiating table with Russia. So basically not to force them against their own will. It is Ukraine's choice. Then moving across to yet another Russian mobilization blunder. So in this video, we have a recently mobilized conscript talking about his newfound living conditions, and he has a moment of truth and realization. So he is near the front line, but not yet on it, really close at the Svartova direction. He's being forced to live in these always muddy and wet conditions. Everything is wet and dripping. There is no stove. Everyone's stuff is wet. He's freezing. He says he can't fight in these conditions. Then he also goes on to say, quote, "Now it's clear why contract soldiers run away. You can't live in these wet pits for too long." Then he basically gets all existential and says, how could this have happened? How could he be mobilized when he had an office job, he paid taxes, he was a contributing member to society, and basically learns that the system is pitted against him. Then he gets quite angry in the end. So really, yet another example of a Russian getting treated like absolute garbage by their compassionless government on all levels of government. Not a care could be given to him. Then to switch gears, something a bit lighter. So on the lighter side of news here, now this video is from about 2 weeks ago now in the eastern Donbass region from memory. I wanted to share it earlier. I didn't get a chance, but I believe that it was important to show because it seems like a history first, a world first. So a Russian soldier who was somewhat disliked by his trench comrades got out of the trenches and walked for a bit, then saw a Ukrainian drone flying past him. So he waved to it, surrenders to it, and has it effectively walk him back to the Ukrainian side to surrender with. Can you imagine? I bet no one in war has surrendered to a drone before like that and walked back like a dog on a leash. So thanks for watching today, guys. That's another video there. I really appreciate all your support. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.